A cookbook lands on Wolfe's desk, with a name no one expected and a lie too neat. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Write it in the comments below. You all make this channel come alive. Let's get going. When a guy walks into the brownstone with a cookbook clutched like it's the Magna Carta, you either brace for a pitch or a confession. I was halfway through balancing the books, my version of playing with numbers until they stopped yelling, when the doorbell buzzed with that particular kind of insistence that smells like trouble in a leather glove. I answered, because Fritz was marinating beef kidneys for Wolfe's lunch and didn't deserve to deal with whoever thought we were a public. Information desk. The man standing on the stoop was tall, with a neatly combed moustache that looked like it had seen military service, and hands too clean for a Wednesday morning. The book in his grip was a pristine copy of the American Epicure, 1939 edition, with a spine that had clearly never faced a kitchen. "I'm looking for Mr. Nero Wolfe," he said, with the accent of a guy who'd been taught to say it with his chin. "Congratulations," I said. "You found his front door. What's the urgency?" "Under-seasoned veal." He blinked, adjusted his grip on the cookbook and stepped in as if I'd invited him. I let him. Wolfe hates it when I screen out the good stories before they're even told. By the time I ushered our guest into the office, Wolfe was already in his chair, nestled between stacks of unread mail and unreadier opinions. He didn't lift his eyes from the yellow-spined volume in his lap. Something about Montenegrin mushrooms, I think, but his voice came out like a creak in a cathedral. "State your name and your reason, and be brief in both." The man placed the cookbook on Wolfe's desk like he was offering an artifact to the gods. "My name is Lionel Drexler. I'm the owner of Lion's Hearth, the restaurant. Perhaps you've heard of it?" "I have not," Wolfe said. "Mr. Goodwin." "It's where Broadway types go to eat expensive duck and remind each other they're not washed up," I supplied. Drexler ignored that. 3 days ago, during an anniversary event, a rare cookbook was stolen from our display, a first edition signed by 8 of the country's greatest chefs, including Charles Rowe, who hasn't signed anything since 1947. "I received this copy," he tapped the book gently, "in the mail yesterday with all the original signatures, except one. The signature for Rowe isn't his. It's a forgery." Wolfe looked up now. His eyes were like pond water, still reflective and probably deeper than you'd want to find out. "You are certain?" "I'm not an expert," Drexler admitted, "but I've seen Rowe's signature a dozen times. This one is wrong, and the ink is fresh. Someone mailed me a forgery in place of the stolen copy." I could see Wolfe's eyelid twitch, which for him is the equivalent of spiking a football. He didn't care about sentimental cooks or theatrical cuisine, but forgery, especially. In the realm of culinary literature, ranked somewhere just below arson in his personal hierarchy of sins. "And you suspect?" Wolfe asked. "I suspect sabotage. The event was attended by competitors, critics, and one chef who spent the last year claiming I plagiarized his truffle custard, but I can't prove anything. I want you to find out who switched the books. Discreetly." That last word always gets me. People think hiring Wolfe is like ordering a whisper from a vending machine. They forget that discretion doesn't mean inaction. It means knowing exactly when to pull the thread. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressing together like he was weighing the air. "You have no interest in recovering the original?" "I do, but if that's impossible, I want the culprit exposed. This could ruin me. Some are already whispering I staged the theft for publicity. I didn't." Wolfe closed the book in his lap. "Leave your copy here. Mr. Goodwin will make a record of the signatures. Return tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Drexler hesitated, then obeyed. As soon as the door clicked shut behind him, Wolfe muttered, "Bah! Signed cookbooks. The modern obsession with ink over intellect. You're taking the case?" I asked. "I am not." I raised an eyebrow. "But you told him to come back." "I did. Because the forgery is obvious, and because someone bold enough to fabricate Charles Rowe's signature is worth observing. You will visit Lion's Hearth." "Lunch or espionage?" I said. "Neither," Wolfe replied. "You will see who benefits most from the theft of a signature that is not what it claims to be," which, translated from Wolfe speak, meant I'd be poking around a room full of egos dressed like chefs and trying not to get flambéed. It was just another Wednesday. I've never had much patience for pretentious menus or sauces that take longer to pronounce than prepare, but I do appreciate a place that knows how to fry potatoes right. Lion's Hearth, on the other hand, didn't. Seemed too interested in potatoes or people. The joint was sleek, expensive, and cold enough to make a banker feel underdressed. The host, wearing a smirk tailored tighter than his vest, asked me if I had a reservation. I told him I had something better, a reason. "I'm here to speak with Lionel Drexler's head chef," I said, flashing the grin I reserve for gatekeepers. "Archie Goodwin, private investigator, sort of." That last bit always gets attention. The host hesitated long enough to realize I wasn't going to bribe him or vanish, then led me past a dining room filled with crystal, hushed conversations and so much white linen it felt like a high-end sanitarium. We wound through a service corridor that smelled of thyme and warm steel before reaching the kitchen. There's a moment in every high-end restaurant kitchen where you expect Mozart and get Motorhead. This one was no exception. Pots clanged. Someone shouted about missing lemon zest. A tray of duck confit slid past like it was late for a runway show. In the middle of it all stood a woman in chef's whites, arms folded, voice low but with the kind of tone that cut through brass and bravado alike. "Chef Varela," the host announced, "a Mr. Goodwin to see you." She turned, dark eyes, close-cropped hair, no time for niceties and no tolerance for nonsense. I liked her already. "You're with Drexler?" she asked. "Not exactly," I said. "I'm with Wolfe, Nero Wolfe. He's been asked to look into the cookbook switcheroo." That earned me a brief arch look. "And he sent you to interrogate the staff?" "Interview," I corrected. "Interrogate is for people with handcuffs or subpoenas. I'm just here to ask who might have wanted to make Mr. Drexler look like a fraud in front of his foie gras crowd." She didn't smile, but her shoulders eased a notch. "Then you're wasting your time. That book was under glass on a sealed stand during the entire event. No one touched it until the night was over. It was my team who packed it up. It went into Drexler's safe with the wine receipts." "Anyone else have access to the safe?" "Only Drexler and the event coordinator, Claire Nestle." I made a mental note. I'd never met a Claire who didn't like drama, and the ones with keys were usually worse. "Was the book valuable?" I asked. Varela shrugged. "To collectors, maybe. I don't collect autographs. I collect working ovens and sharp knives. Anyone on your staff harboring hard feelings toward Drexler?" "Besides me." She let the words hang. "He's a brand, not a boss. The restaurant makes money because I run it like a ship and he turns it into theater." I liked her more by the second. "Where were you when the theft happened?" "Cooking. For 200 egos. I didn't exactly slip off to play book thief. Anyone who might have?" She gave me a list of names: 2 sous chefs, a pastry savant with an Instagram following, and a prep cook named Elias, who used to work under Charles Rowe himself, until Rowe's final public meltdown. That lit a candle. Rowe's signature was forged. "You think Elias might have tried to replicate it?" She narrowed her eyes. "If he did, he didn't do it for money. Elias worships Rowe. If he forged it, it was either to protect Drexler or punish him." "Two interesting options," I said. "Thanks for the candor, chef." She looked back, toward the line. "Just find out who turned my kitchen into a crime scene. I've got duck breast to finish and 3 food critics in the lounge." I left the kitchen with more questions than answers, and a growling stomach. I'd been offered no samples, which I took personally. But I wasn't there for the duck. I was there to figure out why a forger decided to insert themselves into a cookbook no one had read since Truman was in office. Back in the dining room, I asked to see Claire Nestle. She arrived with the glide of someone trained in both hospitality and high-stakes PR. Platinum blonde hair, sharp suit, and a voice that had definitely soothed a few celebrities. "I was told you're investigating the cookbook incident." She said, all smiles and polish. "That's one way to put it," I said. "You had access to the safe?" "Of course, I organized the entire event. It was my idea to display the book in the first place. A little historical flair. Our clientele eats that up." "Was the book moved at any point?" "Only once. A food critic wanted a closer look. I supervised it. Gloves, a velvet cloth. The whole thing was over in 3 minutes. Who was the critic?" "Kevin Rusk, Forkline Weekly. He's got more opinions than credentials, but Drexler wanted him on the guest list. Would he know how to spot a forged signature? Kevin thinks every wine label is a cryptic message. He'd notice if something was off, but he's not exactly a forensic specialist. I took a good look at her, too composed. Something in her tone said she was more worried about the story leaking than solving the case. Anyone else handle the book? No, not even Drexler. He hates touching old paper, said it made him sneeze. A sneeze-worthy signature, then. I wrapped up with Claire and made a quick stop to chat with Elias. The kid was thin, intense, and had eyes like burnt espresso. When I mentioned Charles Rowe, he stiffened like I'd insulted his mother. You worked under him? I asked. He taught me everything, Elias said, until he stopped teaching anyone. Do you still have samples of his handwriting, notes, recipes? I do. You mind if I take a look? He hesitated, then nodded. After my shift. Meet me out back at 5. I keep the notebooks in my locker. If someone forged his name, I'll know. I left with the distinct feeling that Elias was either the answer or the next distraction. Either way, he had Rowe's ghost on his back, and I intended to find out if he'd used it for revenge. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Fritz had plated lunch, beef kidneys as threatened, and Wolfe was at the table, napkin tucked, like he was defending his neck from cold air and incompetence. Well, he asked between bites. There's no shortage of motives, I said. But I've got one name that floats higher than the rest. Elias, devoted apprentice of the guy whose signature was forged. He's either defending a legacy or framing Drexler. Sentimental idiocy, Wolfe muttered. No man should idolize. Another so completely. It leads only to betrayal or disappointment. Sounds like you're speaking from experience. He lifted an eyebrow. Are you finished with your indulgence? Not quite. I've got a meeting with Elias after his shift. He says he's got samples of Rowe's writing, Wolfe grunted. Very well, proceed, but observe carefully. Devotion often conceals deceit. He sipped his beer. And bring me the forged page. I wish to see for myself how poorly it imitates. Sincerity, which in Wolfe's world was the equivalent of calling someone's bluff before the cards hit the table. I just hoped Elias wasn't holding jokers. The alley behind Lion's Hearth wasn't built for reflection. It smelled of fryer grease and week-old ambition, with a row of dented trash bins that hummed like dying insects. I was 5 minutes early, but Elias was already waiting, perched on an overturned crate like a kid guarding lunch money. He held a small canvas messenger bag against his chest like it might run off if he blinked. You came alone, he said, eyes darting past me. Not the dramatic type, I told him. You've got the samples. He opened the bag and pulled out a spiral-bound notebook, so old the edges had yellowed. Another followed, then a third, Rowe's handwriting preserved like sacred scripture. Each page was filled with scrawls in blue ink slanted left, sharp in pressure. Rowe wrote like a man trying to stab flavor into the paper. These are recipes he wrote during his last 2 years, Elias said reverently. He had a system. Crosshatch in the corner meant test. Again underlined twice meant final version. He always signed the top of the last page. I flipped through one, then another. The signature was there each time. Charles Rowe, tall C, curling E, and a hook in the W like a fish breaking the surface. You memorize these? I asked. More than that. I practiced them. For fun. I thought, if I ever published his unfinished recipes, I'd need to make them feel like him. I looked up at him. So you admit you can copy his signature? He hesitated. Yes, but I didn't forge it, not for that book. I wouldn't desecrate it. Someone did, I said, and they knew the signature well enough to almost get right. Elias looked away, biting his lip. I saw Claire holding the book after the event the next morning. I was doing inventory, and she came out of Drexler's office with it, flipping through like she was checking pages. Any idea? Why, she said nothing, just looked up, saw me, and shut it, fast. Could she have had access to Rowe's real signature? He blinked. If she found my locker. That was something. I took a few photos of the signature pages and promised to return the notebooks when Wolfe was done. Elias thanked me like I'd saved a pet from traffic, then scurried back inside. Ducking through the rear door before his shift manager noticed, he was breathing air that hadn't been charged at market price. There was halfway down the block when I felt the itch, the one you get when someone's watching but pretending not to. I stopped by a bodega, leaned on the counter like I was browsing gum flavors, and glanced back. There he was, tall, older, thinning, hair and wearing the kind of brown leather jacket people buy when they think it'll make them disappear. His eyes weren't fast enough. When I turned, he turned too, awkwardly. Bad spy. Probably not freelance. I let him tail me 3 more blocks, then spun into a corner diner and watched through the glass. He walked past, trying not to break stride, but his head dipped to scan the booths. Whoever he was, he hadn't signed up. For subtlety. I made a note of his features, pulled out my phone and dialed Saul Panzer. "Archie," he answered on the first ring. "Like always. You busy?" "Define busy." "I need a background check. Male, 6 foot, 50-something, probably ex-cop or trying to look like one. Brown leather jacket. Chews gum, like it owes him rent. License plate. Didn't drive. On foot. Might be working for Drexler. Might not. But he followed me from Lion's Hearth." "I'll start digging. Name?" "Don't have one yet. I'll still start digging." I hung up and returned to the brownstone. Wolfe was in the plant room, communing with orchids and ignoring the existence of the outside world. Fritz passed me a note on a folded linen napkin. "Do not interrupt until 6 o'clock. Vital temperature variance." I knew better than to test the thermal boundaries of an orchid. Instead, I went up to my room and spread out the photos of Rose's signatures. Then I pulled out the forgery Wolfe had flagged, Drexler's replacement. Copy of the American Epicure. The difference wasn't glaring, but once you stared long enough, the errors started showing their seams. The loops were off. The pressure was inconsistent. And most telling, Rowe never signed in black ink, ever. Blue was a superstition with him, one of those chef eccentricities. I found the quote once in a magazine profile. "Black ink is for balance sheets, blue is for belief." Wolfe had a point. A forger trying to honor Rowe would have used blue. Someone faking it fast, maybe under pressure, might have grabbed the nearest pen. At 6, the elevator hummed, and Wolfe emerged from his green sanctuary, smelling faintly of eucalyptus and judgment. "Well?" he asked, settling into his chair. I passed him the forged page and the photos. He scanned each silently, brow furrowed. "This is competent mimicry," he said at last, "but no heart. See this loop? Too rigid. And here, the tail. It lacks. Rowe's habitual retrace." He set the photos aside. "Claire Nestel," I said, "handled the book after the event, had access. Might have found Elias's samples, might have panicked. To what end? Drexler's been accused of staging this. If she thought the real book was lost or stolen on her watch, she might have tried to cover the damage, swap in a replica. Fake the signature, keep the client happy." "A foolish calculation," Wolfe said. "If discovered, the damage multiplies." "That's assuming she didn't want the discovery. Maybe she wanted to bury Drexler." He steepled his fingers. "Elias? Devoted. Maybe too much. But I believe him. He wouldn't forge Rowe unless he believed it was in service of a cause. And this doesn't feel like that." Wolfe nodded. "We require a controlled disruption." I frowned. "You want to poke the beehive? I wish to observe which bee stings." He tapped his intercom. "Fritz, please prepare the front room. We will receive company tomorrow at noon." "Who's on the guest list?" I asked. "Everyone," Wolfe replied. "Drexler, Varela, Elias, Claire Nestel, and Mr. Kevin Rusk, the critic." "Why Rusk?" "Because if he handled the book with gloved hands, he might have seen something he doesn't know he saw. And I intend to ask him differently." That was Wolfe's way of saying he was going to peel back a few egos with questions that felt like tea, polite, warm, and steeped long enough to scald. I left him with his thoughts and went to call each invitee. Post confirmed. Claire took the longest to agree. I told her it was routine, that Wolfe wanted clarity. She said, "I suppose if this will settle things." I didn't tell her it wouldn't. Not yet. At midnight, Saul called back. "Your tale has a name," he said. "Paulie Denham. Ex-cop, kicked off the force for evidence tampering, private now. Works loose jobs for hospitality firms and restaurateurs. He's been on Drexler's payroll off and on." "Why follow me?" "Either Drexler's scared, or someone's cleaning up." I thanked him and hung up. Downstairs, Wolfe was snoring faintly in his chair, book on his belly, beer glass empty. I sat across from him, watched the steam rising from Fritz's teapot, and wondered which of tomorrow's guests would flinch first when Wolfe started talking, because someone in that room had forged a signature not for money, but for control, and Wolfe hated nothing more than someone trying to control the truth before he'd had a word with it. You can always tell who's worried when they show up early to a Nero Wolfe appointment. At 11:30 sharp, Claire Nestle rang the bell, lips tight and blazer tighter, like she'd rather be anywhere else but had nowhere else to hide. I greeted her with my best morning smirk and guided her into the front room, where she took the chair closest to the exit. That told me plenty. By 11:45, Varela walked in with the same energy she probably brought into a kitchen at rush hour, focused, unsentimental, and armed with truth, whether we wanted it or not. She didn't ask for water. She didn't offer hellos, just sat. Chef chairs like she was used to giving orders and not explaining them. Then came Elias. Kid was nervous, clutching the messenger bag again, probably with Rose's notebook still inside. His eyes danced between Claire and Varela, like he was waiting for one of them to throw a punch or a ladle. Wolfe wasn't even in the room yet, and the atmosphere was already simmering. Drexler arrived last, 11:58 on the dot, hair slicked back like a B-movie mogul, tan that hadn't come from a kitchen. He wore a plum suit with a silk pocket square and a smile rehearsed for gala photos. He nodded to me like I was the help and asked if we'd be long. "I've got a noon. Tasting," he added, like that would sway Wolfe's clock. "I hope it goes better than your last event," I said. "No signatures this time?" He didn't laugh, but the corners of his mouth flickered. A minute later, Wolfe entered. The room adjusted to him. It always did. Wolfe didn't sit behind his desk. Not yet. He took a position near the bookcase, standing for once with a hand resting lightly on the globe, like he might spin it just to decide who got questioned first. "Thank you for coming," he began. "You are here not to defend yourselves, but to observe. Mr. Goodwin will be present to clarify. I will conduct this as efficiently as possible, assuming no one wastes time." He turned to Drexler. "You received the forged cookbook through the mail. You claim you immediately suspected the signature of Charles Rowe was false. Why?" Drexler adjusted his cuffs. "It didn't match the others, and Rowe always used blue ink, everyone knows that." "Do they?" Wolfe's voice cooled by a few degrees. "Who exactly is everyone?" "Well, people in the industry, anyone who follows chef history." "Did you?" Drexler hesitated. Yes, I've read a few things." "You hosted a signature display," Wolfe said. "Did you personally confirm the validity of the signatures before the event?" "No," Drexler said, a little less confidently. "Claire handled that." Wolfe pivoted to her. "Miss Nestle, you inspected the book before the event." "Yes, it was delivered to me by the collector who loaned it. I catalogued the pages and ensured the signatures were intact." "Did you document the specific appearance of Rowe's signature?" She blinked. "No, I didn't think I needed to." "You also handled the book the morning after the event?" "Yes, briefly. I was checking it before filing the return paperwork." "Where was it stored overnight?" "In the safe." "Accessible by?" "Just me and Mr. Drexler." Wolfe said nothing. He let the quiet settle like dust. Varela folded her arms. "Why are we doing this? Someone forged a name. Fine. What's it got to do with us?" "Because," Wolfe said smoothly, "whoever forged it had access to a sample of Rowe's signature, an accurate one, and while Elias admits to having such samples, Miss Nestle is the only one known to have handled both, the original book and the replacement. That places her, unfortunately, at the axis of opportunity." Claire bristled. "That's absurd. I was trying to ensure Drexler didn't look like a fool. When I noticed the original was missing, I panicked. I assumed it had been misplaced or misfiled. So yes, I found a backup copy in our archives and substituted it, and forged Rowe's name." She didn't answer. Wolfe sat now, finally, as if satisfied the field had tilted. "You believe Drexler would blame you," Claire exhaled. "He's blamed me for worse," Drexler sputtered. "You're saying you forged a legendary chef's signature because you didn't want to take the heat?" Claire turned sharply. "No, I did it because you built your reputation on illusion. You throw money at history to legitimize yourself. I thought, if I fixed it before anyone noticed, we could maintain the illusion a little longer." Wolfe raised a hand. Miss Nestle. Why black ink? What? Rowe never signed in black ink. Why use it? Claire hesitated. I didn't think anyone would look that closely. It was the only pen I had. Elias leaned forward now. You took my samples, from my locker. Claire stared at him. I didn't know they were yours. Wolfe closed his eyes for a beat. Miss Nestle, you did not steal the book. You merely concealed its theft. Someone else removed the original. You obscured the absence by manufacturing a replacement, thus implicating yourself. Claire said nothing. Wolfe turned to me. Mr. Goodwin, the tale you mentioned. Paulie Denham? I nodded. On Drexler's payroll. Wolfe addressed Drexler. You employed a disgraced ex-officer to follow Mr. Goodwin. Why? Drexler flushed. Because I didn't know what you were doing. I didn't hire you. Claire did. I thought maybe you were trying to pin something on me. You were correct. To worry, Wolfe said. The forgery made it appear you were complicit. Fortunately for you, your incompetence exceeds your malice. Claire looked like she'd just taken a punch without moving. Wolfe shifted his gaze again. Chef Varela. She met his look without flinching. You said earlier that only 2 people had access to the safe. I would submit there were 3. Her eyes narrowed. Who? Kevin Rusk. Varela laughed. Rusk? The critic? He's too lazy to forge anything. Perhaps. But he asked to see the book. You and Claire allowed it. Claire whispered. He had gloves. He didn't touch anything. Yet when he returned it, he commented on Rowe's signature being faint. I leaned forward. No one said that before. Because it wasn't faint, Wolfe said. But Rusk had reason to say it was. He was planning an article accusing Drexler of fabrication. He needed a visual cue. He needed suspicion. Claire looked horrified. You think he stole the book? I think he tampered with it. I think he photographed the real signature, intending to compare it later and call it out. I believe in doing so, he panicked. Maybe he smeared the ink. Maybe he feared being caught. Either way, he created an opportunity. Varela's mouth twitched, and Claire filled it. Precisely, Wolfe said. One lie feeding another. But the forgery, the real forgery, began with vanity, Drexler's hunger for recognition, and Rusk's hunger to destroy it. I cleared my throat. What's the play now? Wolfe folded his hands. Return the replacement to the collector. Report the incident as mishandled inventory and let the forgery rest. Confront Rusk privately if desired, but make no public statements. Drexler looked deflated. Claire looked smaller. Varela looked like she'd just gotten confirmation that everyone was as hopeless as she suspected. Wolfe stood. The illusion has cracked. Perhaps that's not such a tragedy. And with that he exited. I ushered the guests out one by one. Elias stayed back, looking lost. I patted his shoulder. You kept Rowe's legacy alive, kid, I said. In the end, that's worth more than ink. He nodded and slipped out quietly. Dinner that night was lamb. Wolfe barely said a word, chewing slowly, thinking about fraud and human seasoning. When the plates were cleared, he finally spoke. Signatures are vanity. Legacy lies in the flavor. I raised my glass. To flavor. He didn't raise his, but he didn't argue either. The thing about a forgery is once you know it's fake, it won't stop screaming at you. Wolfe had made his point. Claire fumbled the recovery, Rusk tampered out of spite, and Drexler had his ego shoved through. The wood chipper. But something was still bugging me, like a fly that knows the window is closed but keeps smacking it anyway. It was the collector, the guy Claire mentioned, the one who loaned the book in the first place, supposedly trustworthy, known in the culinary circles and above reproach. But in all this drama he'd been a ghost. No full name, no phone call, no appearance at any point to reclaim the cookbook that had supposedly gone missing and been replaced by a counterfeit. That kind of silence doesn't just happen. Either the collector didn't care, or he had something to gain from pretending the book was stolen. I raised the issue over breakfast. Wolfe was elbow-deep in soft-boiled eggs, sipping coffee like it had wronged him personally. The collector, I said. Still anonymous. Claire only mentioned him in passing. Don't you find it strange that someone who owned a one-of-a-kind, signed edition of the American Epicure didn't scream bloody murder when it vanished? Wolfe wiped his mouth with a napkin. Yes, I found it strange yesterday. I find it stranger today. So, we're poking the hole? You will. Poke, gently. I called Claire that morning, caught her in the middle of whatever damage control she was doing for Drexler. She sounded like someone trying to sweep up glass before a toddler noticed. The collector, I said. I need a name. She hesitated. He wasn't comfortable going public. I'm not asking for a biography, just a name. If Wolfe is expected to clean up this mess, he needs to know who spilled it. A pause then. Edward Braverman, he owns a restaurant supply company, collects signed menus, chef memoirs, cookbooks. He said the Epicure copy was insured, so he wasn't worried about its return. Did he see the replacement? No. I told him the book had been switched and that we were investigating. He told me to let it go. Now we were getting somewhere. I jotted down Braverman's info and paid him a visit. His office was in a red brick warehouse in Midtown, unlabeled door, buzzer that barely worked, and a secretary who looked like her last job was playing poker with mobsters. She sized me up, buzzed me through, and led me to a back room where Braverman sat behind a desk, made of real oak and silent contempt. He was round, balding, and wore glasses with frames thick enough to serve lunch on. He didn't get up when I entered. You're the detective, he said, or Wolfe's messenger pigeon. Whichever flaps faster, I said. You loaned a rare cookbook to Drexler's restaurant. It disappeared. You didn't scream. Why? I'm insured, he said flatly. The policy covered full appraised value. Why chase ghosts? Because it wasn't just a theft, I said. The forgery caused waves. People's reputations got stepped on, yours included. He waved it off. Let Drexler handle his mess. He borrowed the book to impress a room full of donors. I told him not to. Should have glued it to the display. You're saying you didn't care. I cared, but not enough to get lawyers involved. The policy's clear, and let's be honest, the book wasn't as pristine as everyone claimed. That landed like a brick in a china shop. You're saying it wasn't real. Oh, the book was real, the signatures, who knows? Most collectors lie to themselves. I bought it from a French auction site 5 years ago. Half the chefs were already dead. Charles Rowe hadn't signed anything publicly in decades. I always had doubts. Did Claire know that? No. And I didn't tell her. Why pop the balloon if the parade's already started? So now we had a forged book, replaced by a different forged book, and no one on either end was willing to admit that both were fakes. I left Braverman's office with the distinct feeling I needed a shower and a drink, maybe not in that order. Back at the brownstone, I relayed the conversation, while Wolfe demolished a plate of Gruyere omelettes with the serenity of a man who never doubted his own judgment. Ah, he said, so the forgery preceded the forgery. Yep. Which means Claire didn't swap. Time masterpiece for a forgery. She replaced a forgery with a slightly worse forgery. And Rusk? He might have discovered the fake, or suspected, but he couldn't expose it without implicating Braverman or getting egg on Drexler's tie. So he stirred the pot instead, hoping someone would boil over. Wolfe reclined slightly. I admire the symmetry, a forgery built upon forgery. It becomes artless self-preservation masquerading as legacy. So do we tell Drexler? I asked. Or Claire? Wolfe lifted his glass. No, let them protect their illusions. Truth in this case serves no appetite. I should have known he'd say that. The next morning, Saul Panzer called with more intel. Turns out Paulie Denham, the ex-cop turned private snoop, had been sniffing around Braverman too. Drexler had paid him to check on the book's value after the event, not the replacement, the original. He didn't trust Claire's account. Probably never had. That told me Drexler suspected the truth. The book was never genuine. He just didn't want Wolfe to say it out loud. When I brought this to Wolfe, he nodded slowly. Then the silence was strategic. By everyone, I said. Braverman lied by omission. Claire lied by panic. Rusk lied by ego, and Drexler lied by, well, habit. And Elias? Wolfe asked. I smiled. He's probably the only person in the whole mess who didn't lie. He just wanted Rose name treated with respect. Then I suggest we return his notebooks, Wolfe said, and keep his name out of our report. That afternoon I met Elias behind Lion's hearth again. His hands were stained with beet juice and stress, but he looked lighter when I handed over the bag. "A wolf says you're free and clear," I told him, "and you're one of the few who came out of this with your dignity." Elias smiled. Roe would have hated this whole thing. He used to say that most chefs chase flavor like it's applause. But it's supposed to be silence, quiet satisfaction. "That sounds like Wolfe," I said. "I thought he didn't cook." "He doesn't," I said, "but he eats like truth depends on it." Back at the brownstone, dinner was cassoulet. Wolfe didn't speak for the first 10 minutes, too busy dissecting the garlic ratios. When he finally looked up, he said, "Mr. Goodwin, I have decided that autographed cookbooks are inferior to annotated ones." "Because they contain real thoughts?" I asked. "No," he said, sipping beer. "Because at least their lies are still about the food." I toasted him with my water glass. "Here's to honest margins and dishonest margins, and to the people who think forgery's easier than flavor." He didn't smile. But his second helping said enough. Just when you think a case has folded itself neatly, Wolfe finishes dessert and asks for the napkin, not to wipe his mouth, but to write something down. That's how I knew we weren't done. Cassoulet had come and gone. Fritz was polishing silverware like it owed him rent, and Wolfe hadn't moved from his chair. But he'd scribbled a single line on the linen napkin and pushed it toward me like it might combust in someone else's hands. "This is your next errand," he said. I read it. "Rusk's column archive, 6 months. You think Rusk left a breadcrumb?" "I think he built a trail without meaning to," Wolfe said. "A man does not undermine others publicly unless he has a private stake. I want you to determine whether this is habit or strategy." So I paid a visit to Forkline Weekly, the Rag Rusk wrote for. Their office was buried on the 4th floor of a midtown building with an elevator that groaned like it was debating survival. Inside it smelled like cold coffee, bad lighting, and overdue rent. The editor, a squat guy named Bernard Tullis, looked like a man who'd once bet on the wrong horse and had been writing about it ever since. "You're with Wolfe?" he asked. When I flashed my card. "Yep. Looking into Rusk's recent work. Need a peek at his last 6 months' worth of restaurant columns." Tullis scratched his chin. "He's been suspended. Not officially, but yeah, you're not the first to come sniffing. He stirred some oil with that Drexler piece. He published already. Scheduled to. Pulled last minute. Legal flagged it. Said it implied Drexler's collection was forged." "Not confirmed. Libel territory." I leaned in. "You have a copy?" He nodded and opened a drawer, pulling out a proof with red pen notes scribbled across the header. "Didn't go to print, but it was ready." I scanned the first paragraph. It started with theatrics. "Beneath the lamb reductions and butterfoam lies a lie." You know the type. It was all knives in velvet. But buried halfway down the page, one line stood out. "A signature in black ink betrays the man who swore by blue." I looked up. He knew about Roe's signature quirk. "Of course," Tullis said. "Rusk kept notes on chefs like they were suspects, even had a handwriting sample book. Obsessed with chef superstitions. Used to say they were the only religion left in fine dining." "You have his notes?" Tullis tapped his desk. "We cleared out his stuff after the suspension. They're boxed in the back. You want 'em?" "I want 'em." An hour later, I was back in the brownstone with 2 cardboard boxes and a migraine from reading Rusk's opinions on vinegar pairings. Wolfe had me unpack them on the coffee table. Inside were handwritten observations, photo clippings, signed menus, and a black moleskin notebook labeled "Idiosyncrasies Do Not Edit." That was our goldmine. I flipped through until I found Roe's page. Wolfe leaned in, not standing, of course, but craning just enough to let me know this was no longer a curiosity. It was a clue. The page listed, always signed in blue. Looped. C but flat crossbar on T's. No flourish on endings. Left margins tight. Dislikes vertical pens. Writes at 20-degree tilt. Then, at the bottom, known for turning down collector requests unless done in person, detests posthumous signature hunts. I looked up. "So Rusk knew Roe's signature inside and out." Wolfe nodded. "And had samples. He may have been the only person outside of Elias with reliable models. Which means, Mr. Goodwin, he could have forged the replacement copy himself." But why? He didn't work for Drexler. He had nothing to gain. Ah, Wolfe said. But what if Drexler wanted the forgery discovered? I blinked. You think he hired Rusk to plant it? No. I think Drexler expected it to be exposed. He was attempting preemptive myth-building. If the forgery had been discovered publicly, Drexler could claim he was duped, sue for damages, and market himself as a victim. Sympathy press, increased bookings, perhaps even a profile piece. A man who was wronged by the culinary elite. Romantic. Tragedy sells. So you're saying Drexler planned for the book to be outed as fake, just not by Claire? Exactly, Wolfe said. And Rusk, ever the opportunist, intended to play both sides, expose the forgery, publish the takedown, and profit from the scandal. But Claire's premature intervention forced him to pull back. His angle collapsed. It fit, but it left one question screaming. Who forged the replacement copy then, if it wasn't Elias and Claire claims she did it in panic? Wolfe tapped the moleskin notebook. Rusk may have helped. You think Claire called him? No. I think, Rusk offered, anonymously, a typed note in the mail. Here is a replacement. Use it wisely, playing puppet master, and sabotaging his own column in the process, Wolfe added. He couldn't run the piece after the forgery was used. It would implicate him. He could be tied to... So there's substitution. I sat back. So Drexler buys a fake. Claire tries to cover it. Rusk exploits it. And Wolfe eats omelettes while they all twist. Not omelettes, Wolfe corrected. Cassoulet. Of course. That evening, Saul confirmed one last detail. Rusk bought archival quality paper and black ink refills from a midtown specialty shop. Same week, the forged copy showed up. That sealed it. Rusk wasn't just a critic with a grudge. He was an artist with a scalpel and a safety net. He didn't just spot forgery. He manufactured it to manufacture outrage. Wolfe dictated a letter, carefully worded, razor precise. It went to Forkline Weekly's legal department. No accusation, no threat. Just a series of facts. The kind that made libel lawyers start whimpering. And editors start calling people back from suspension. 2 days later, Tullis called. Rusk's resigned, he said. We won't be printing his piece. You'll be pleased to know he left town. I'm not pleased, I said, but I'm not surprised. Wolfe didn't gloat. He never did when an opponent self-destructed. He just moved the topic back. To food or orchids or the literary sins of modern cookbooks. That night as we finished dinner, I said, So what's the moral, boss? Wolfe looked over his glass. Forgery reveals the vanity of the forger, but exposure reveals the vanity of us all. I nodded. You ever fake anything? Never, he said. I am far too lazy. Truth requires less maintenance. I couldn't argue with that. 3 days had passed since Rusk skipped town, which in our line of work is just long enough for people to start rewriting the story in their heads. Drexler went back to promoting seasonal foy like nothing happened. Claire resumed micromanaging events with the panic of someone who knows they're still on thin ice, and Elias returned to prep duty, carving onions with a reverence usually. Reserved for hymns. But Wolfe wasn't satisfied, not yet. That's the thing with him. Solving the mystery is only half the job. The other half is cleaning up the debris before someone else decides to start digging. He called me into the office that morning, orchid mist still clinging to his sleeves like smoke. We have a final obligation, he said, tapping a letter. On his desk. Who's this for, I asked, picking it up. The insurance company listed on Braverman's policy. That made me pause. You're outing the original forgery? I'm confirming it, he said, quietly. Without scandal. But thoroughly. I leaned back in the chair. You're sure this won't blow back on Elias or Claire? I have omitted their names, Wolfe said. The letter concerns Braverman's failure to disclose the doubtful provenance of the book at the time of filing his claim. It is a matter of insurance fraud. And Drexler? Wolfe let out a breath that could have flattened souffle. Mr. Drexler has chosen to resume his performances. Let him. But Braverman attempted to profit twice, first by misrepresenting the book's value, second by remaining silent during an active investigation. I folded the letter. You're using the ink he didn't. Precisely. I dropped the letter off by courier, knowing full well it might trigger a quiet audit. A polite phone call, maybe even a cancelled policy. It wouldn't make headlines, but Braverman would feel it, where it counted. That afternoon, something odd happened. Saul Panzer showed up unannounced. Now Saul doesn't visit the brownstone unless something's broken, burning, or bleeding. Money. He walked in without a word, handed Wolfe a manila envelope, and sat on the edge of the guest chair like someone who'd just stepped off a moving train. Wolfe opened the envelope. Inside was a small bundle of photos, high-res, time-stamped, and too crisp to be meaningless. They showed Rusk, 3 days before the event, meeting Claire Nestel at a cafe in Gramercy. No disguises, no menus between them. Just her, leaning forward, him scribbling something on a pad. She lied, I muttered. She said she didn't contact him. Wolfe didn't speak. He kept flipping through the photos. Another shot showed Rusk handing Claire a small box, like the kind used for rings or pens. Zoomed on the box? Wolfe asked. Saul nodded. Already. Did? It's a Mont Blanc case, Model 146 Black Barrel. Same model used in the forgery. I whistled low. So she didn't panic and forge the signature. She asked Rusk to do it for her. Or accepted his offer, Wolfe said. The distinction is academic. What does that change? Wolfe leaned back. It complicates the question of guilt. Claire's act was not spontaneous. It was calculated. Which means Drexler's suspicion of her was not paranoia. It was pattern recognition. I blinked. Then why didn't she admit it? Because she still hoped to control the narrative. Panic is forgivable. Planning is not. He turned to Saul. Excellent work. Saul nodded once and vanished like a curtain drop. Wolfe returned to the photos, tapping one lightly. She met him outside of work hours. She accepted a tool used in the deception. Then, when confronted, she admitted to only half the truth. I knew where this was going. You want me to call her in? No, Wolfe said. She'll come. Wait 2 hours. 2 hours later, right on cue, the doorbell rang. Claire Nestel stood there, tailored as ever, but the confidence had cracked. You can always tell when someone's had a long night pretending they slept well. I'm here because I think something's coming, she said. You're right, I replied. Come in. She sat in the red chair, never Wolfe's favorite. Always reserved for people circling consequences. Wolfe didn't wait long. You met Mr. Rusk before the event, he said plainly. She didn't flinch. Yes. You asked him to replicate Rowe's signature? No, she said. I asked him if he thought the original was real. I had doubts. He confirmed they were founded. Wolfe raised a brow. And then? He offered to help. Quietly. Said he had samples. Said it would be better to swap the book and bury the scandal than let Drexler become a punchline. So you agreed, Wolfe said. Yes. And accepted a forged signature to cover a forged legacy. Her voice was low now. It wasn't about Drexler. It was about the staff, the restaurant, the reputation. If the event flopped, they'd blame everyone but him. Your motives, Wolfe said, were self-preserving and selfless in equal measure. She didn't answer. I have sent a letter to Braverman's insurer, he added. You are not named, but understand, if they investigate deeper, your involvement may surface. Claire nodded slowly. I deserve that. You do, Wolfe said, but you also deserve a chance to stop pretending it was panic. She stood. Are you going to tell Drexler? No. He will learn it in time, as all owners do. The price of ignorance is delay. She left, without another word. Later. That night, Fritz brought out mushroom risotto with aged parmesan. Wolfe savored each bite like it might hold a final clue. Then, as we lingered over coffee, he said, Miss Nestel is not without principle. She simply wears it like perfume, present but faint. You think she'll resign? No. He said, she'll rebuild quietly, perhaps better this time. I looked out the window. The street was calm, no sirens, no flashbulbs, just the sound of a world continuing to pretend things make sense. You know, I said, this case didn't have a murder, a jewel thief, or even a real victim. Wolfe sipped his coffee. Not all crimes require corpses. Some merely need mirrors. I smiled. And some mirrors were forged. He didn't disagree. If you've never seen Nero Wolfe content, you don't know what real stillness looks like. Not laziness, stillness. Stillness as an art form, as control. That evening, after Claire's quiet confession and Saul's delivery of photographic truth, Wolfe entered a kind of serenity I hadn't seen since he correctly predicted the exact number of truffles in a rival chef's seasonal menu. It wasn't smugness. It was equilibrium. Like the puzzle had settled into place and all that remained was watching the pieces sit still. But I wasn't satisfied. Not quite. There was something off, a flavor missing from the stew. Maybe it was just the lack of an arrest. Maybe it was the fact that, for all the lies, nobody had paid much beyond embarrassment. Or maybe it was the dinner invitation Wolfe handed me that afternoon without a word. "Dinner?" I asked. Wolfe nodded. Lion's Hearth. Drexler extended the invitation, a gesture. "Of goodwill? Of narrative control," Wolfe said, rising. "He wants to reclaim the space, reassert command, and ensure we see the restaurant not as a crime scene but as a cathedral. Sounds like ego with parsley," I said. "And dessert," Wolfe added. Fritz arranged the wardrobe. I polished my shoes. Yes, I do own a pair. And at 7 sharp we stepped into the Lincoln and headed toward culinary diplomacy. Lion's Hearth looked unchanged. Sleek lighting, a soft piano looping near the bar, and an army of hosts who all looked like they'd auditioned for a modern Shakespeare adaptation. Wolfe was greeted like royalty, of course. Drexler emerged in his latest plum ensemble, shook Wolfe's hand exactly once and said, "It's an honor to serve you properly." Wolfe didn't respond. He simply followed the man to the private dining room. It was all curated, personalized menus, a bottle of claret from Wolfe's favorite vintage, and a waiter who looked terrified of blinking without permission. Varela was in the kitchen. We saw her through the glass partition, calling orders like a general in a war that involved microgreens. "I assume you've told no one about the letter," Drexler said once we were seated. Wolfe cut a glance at him. "Assume less, ask more." Drexler exhaled through his teeth. "Fine. Did you tell Braverman?" "No," I informed his insurer. That knocked the smug out of Drexler's shoulders. "You'll ruin him." "I doubt it," Wolfe said. "He has enough capital and lawyers to delay a reckoning." I merely accelerated the discomfort. "You're not interested in the scandal?" "I'm interested in proportion. Braverman defrauded a system. You merely staged one." Drexler poured the wine with hands that had steadied thousands of dollars in Bordeaux but trembled slightly now. "You think I'm a villain," he said. "No," Wolfe replied. "You're a dramatist, and a poor one. You seek applause, not authenticity." That landed. The meal began. First course, a saffron crab bisque that nearly made me forgive Drexler for everything but the signature. Wolfe didn't speak for 10 full minutes. He was too busy evaluating the balance of heat and herb. Then the duck arrived, seared to perfection, plated with blood orange and black garlic reduction. "I would not return," Wolfe said to Drexler between bites, "if the food were anything less than sublime." That was as close to a compliment as Drexler was ever going to get. He knew it too. Halfway through dessert, a chilled hazelnut mousse with raspberry dust and something French I couldn't pronounce, Varela appeared, wiping her hands on a towel, and nodding once at Wolfe. "Chef," Wolfe said. "My compliments." She inclined her head. "Glad to know something real came from that night." Wolfe gestured toward a chair. "Join us." She hesitated, glanced at Drexler, then sat. Her sleeves were rolled, forearms dusted with flour, no pretense. Just a woman who worked. Wolfe fixed her with a steady gaze. "You knew about the book, didn't you?" She didn't blink. "I suspected. I didn't press." "Why not?" "Because I've seen Drexler play 3 games at once. He'll let someone else take the fall while he claims moral victory. Claire was smart. She just didn't move fast enough." "And you?" Wolfe asked. "I cook. I keep staff from mutiny. I tell truth with flavor, not ink. The moment I knew that book was fake, I decided I wouldn't ask questions unless it cost someone their job." "How you should have asked," Wolfe said. She leaned back. "Maybe, but the food never lied." That hung in the air for a bit. I liked it. So did Wolfe. He didn't respond. He just finished his mousse and sipped his wine. On the way out, Drexler offered Wolfe a copy of the night's menu, signed. Wolfe didn't even look at it. "I prefer unsigned documents," he said. "They're harder to forge." That shut the door on that. Back at the brownstone, Fritz was waiting with chamomile tea and judgment. Wolfe retired to the plant room, and I poured a glass of the leftover claret. I sat there, thinking about the whole mess. about Claire's half-confession, Rusk's exit, Braverman's quiet downfall and Drexler's desperate dinner. We'd solved it. Tied it up. But it didn't feel like victory, it felt like trimming weeds on a grave. Wolfe reappeared around midnight, just as I was heading upstairs. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "there will be a letter tomorrow." "To who?" "Claire Nestle." I frowned. "What for?" "To inform her that while she acted unethically, her reasoning was understood, and that she should resign before someone less kind demands it." "You think she'll listen?" "She will," he said. "Because I am neither her boss nor her enemy, and because she knows now that the truth cannot be edited." I nodded. "And Drexler will continue until he exhausts his illusions." "Should we warn him?" Wolfe smiled faintly. "No, let him cook." I turned off the lights and climbed the stairs. In a world full of forged pages and performative reputations, sometimes the real story is told in silence, in decisions made when no one's watching. And sometimes the best endings are the ones where no one gets the last word. The letter to Claire was short. No flattery, no moral lesson, just one sentence written in Wolfe's inimitable block print. "Your decision, when made deliberately, carries more strength than your apology." He signed it only with his name. No sincerely, no respectfully. Just Nero Wolfe beneath the ink, clean and final. I hand-delivered it to Lion's Hearth the following afternoon. Didn't give it to a runner or a manager. Walked straight into Claire's office. Glass door, 2 plants, 1 stack of event brochures with a font loud enough to peel paint, and placed it on her desk. She looked up, expecting a complaint or an invoice. When she saw the envelope, she didn't touch it at first, just stared at it like it might contain a verdict. "From Wolfe," I said. She nodded. He always did prefer economy. I waited while she opened it. No gasp, no crumbling paper, just a pause. Her thumb lingered on Wolfe's name like she was pressing it into her memory. Then she folded the letter again, slipped it into her purse and looked up. "Is this the part where you suggest I go quietly?" "No," I said. "That part's already passed. This is the part where you decide whether you want to be someone who needs suggestion." She smiled, barely. The corners of her mouth moved like someone testing new muscles. "I knew when I called Rusk that it would catch me eventually," she said. "But I thought I could manage it. I've always been able to manage it." "Until the paper started to curl at the edges," I said. "Until someone sharper than me stopped believing my version first." She stood. I thought she might walk past me, maybe say something bitter or defensive, but instead she opened the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a sealed envelope with her name on it. "I wrote this 2 nights ago," she said. "Before the photos. Before the letter. I just didn't hand it in." "Resignation," she nodded. "Effective end of the week. I didn't want to abandon the Friday dinner service." "Of course not," I said. "A crime scene, maybe, but never a calendar." She chuckled. First time I'd seen her laugh in 2 weeks. Then she held the envelope out. "Would you give it to Drexler for me?" I raised an eyebrow. "You're not going to?" "No," she said. "I'd rather resign to someone honest." I took it. As I left her office, the staff was setting up for a pre-theatre rush. Varela stood at the pass, barking temperatures and timing like a maestro wielding steel instead of a baton. She caught my eye as I passed. I raised the envelope slightly. She didn't smile, but I saw her shoulders drop half an inch. Back at the brownstone, I delivered the update. Wolfe accepted it without flourish. He placed Claire's envelope in the drawer beside his chair, the same drawer where he kept correspondence he deemed instructive. "Not valuable, not sentimental, instructive. There's a difference. She'll resurface," he said. "In a smaller venue, something she can shape without deceit." I nodded. "She'll do better." "She already has." We sat in silence for a moment. The air in the room was heavy with closure, but not finality. That's how Wolfe cases end, not with slammed doors or courtroom gavel drama, but with a meal and a shift in the wind. "Anything else to clean up?" I asked. Wolfe reached into his coat pocket and retrieved a note, folded twice. It was written on Lion's Hearth stationery. "I received this yesterday," he said, "delivered with our wine shipment." The note read, "You were right about the illusion and the ink. I'll try something simpler next time, something I don't need a pen for." D.I. exhaled. Drexler's version of a thank you. More of a concession, Wolfe said. Theatrical, but authentic. You think he'll change? No. But he may pause before his next invention, and maybe that was enough. That evening I stopped by Elias's apartment. He shared a loft with 2 other line cooks and a wall full of spice racks that smelled better than most apartments smell cleaned. He opened the door with surprise and suspicion. "I'm not in trouble, am I?" he asked. "Only if you've forged. Any new signatures?" He let me in, nervous. I sat at the counter while he poured coffee. He'd always looked like a man preparing for the next blow, but now there was something steadier in his eyes, like he'd finally walked out of someone. "Elsa's shadow, I heard Claire's leaving," he said. "So you heard right. She was the only one who ever fought for us," he added. "She still did, she just slipped on her way out. I don't blame her. I didn't say you should, but don't follow her footsteps too closely." He nodded. "You still have Rose notebooks?" I asked. He tapped the top shelf. "Up there, safe." "Ever think about finishing what he started?" He blinked. "You mean publish?" "Or adapt. Something honest. With your name this time." Elias smiled. "I'm not ready." "No one ever is," I said. "But you're closer than the guy signing menus in Mont Blanc Black." I left him with the idea. Back home, Wolfe had started his evening beer early. Fritz was assembling something Italian, with too many vowels for me to pronounce. The orchids were spritzed. The city outside was loud as ever, and inside the brownstone was as quiet as it always is when Wolfe decides a case has ended. "So that's it?" I asked. "No," Wolfe said. "That's enough." I sat across from him and poured myself a drink. "You ever sign anything?" "Rarely. Why?" He took a long sip. "Because permanence invites scrutiny, and I have no desire to be remembered more clearly than I was understood." I raised my glass to that. Outside, the city buzzed on. People ordered food they couldn't pronounce from chefs they couldn't see. Somewhere, Drexler was probably planning his next reinvention. Rusk was hiding behind another pen name. Braverman was drafting emails to his insurer, and Claire was staring at a blank calendar with more clarity than she expected. The forgery had been exposed. But so had the reasons behind it. The egos, the fear, the illusion of importance. And Wolfe, in his chair in his sanctuary, had never once left the house. Just like always, spring was creeping in, the kind that made the sidewalk sweat just enough to annoy you. The orchids were holding their blooms longer. Fritz was grumbling about seasonal produce quality, and Wolfe was eating like the weather owed him an apology. Life at the brownstone had, by all appearances, returned to its usual rhythm. But if you've spent more than a week inside this place, you know Wolfe's stillness is never static. It's a pause between moves, not a resignation. The morning after Claire's resignation officially took effect, Wolfe asked me to bring up the cookbook. Not the forged one. Not the original not original. The copy Drexler had gifted us after our visit to Lion's Hearth. Wolfe had accepted it silently at the time, though he never touched it, never opened it. Just stored it on the lowest shelf of the far-right bookcase in the office, spine out, title barely legible. "You want to examine the souvenir?" I asked. "No," he said. "I want to discard it." That was Wolfe's version of a ritual. He rarely destroyed things. He removed them, edited them out of his life the way a chef removes spoiled herbs from the dish, without drama, without comment. But before he could give the order, I flipped through the pages. And there it was, tucked on the inside back cover. Behind the jacket flap, a single slip of paper. Folded once, paper stock from Lion's Hearth, I unfolded it and read the note aloud. "This isn't a gift. It's an ending. Thank you for not forcing mine. C.N. Claire Nestle." I handed the note to Wolfe. He read it once, then again. Then set it on his desk and stared at it for a full minute, eyes narrowed, not angry, not surprised, contemplative. "She didn't sign it," I said. "No," Wolfe said. "She didn't need to." I poured coffee while he leaned back in his chair. That kind of note didn't change facts, didn't erase choices, but it told you something about the person who wrote. "It's something they maybe couldn't say out loud, do we reply?" I asked. Wolfe shook his head. "Some endings are made cleaner by silence." He let the paper sit there all day, didn't file it, didn't toss it, just left it on the desk like a leaf that had blown in and earned its place. Later that afternoon, Saul stopped by. No coat, no file folder. Just a man who'd worked this case without ever really needing to ask why. He brought updates, as always. Braverman's insurance filed a quiet complaint, he said. Nothing loud, but enough to ensure he won't claim twice on a forged collection again. And Rusk? Wolfe asked. Reappeared in San Francisco. New column. Different name. Still bitter. Wolfe snorted faintly. Even vinegar finds new barrels. And Drexler's cooking show, Saul smirked. Pilot tanked. Network execs pulled it after test audiences said he was too proud for television. Imagine that. Wolfe didn't even raise an eyebrow. Saul glanced at the note on the desk. She reach out? No, Wolfe said. She concluded. Saul nodded and left, understanding everything that needed understanding. As dusk fell, Fritz prepared his signature cassoulet. Again. Wolfe didn't complain. He said he wanted to taste it once more under different circumstances. Same ingredients. Different meaning, he muttered as he sliced through the crust. We ate in silence for a few minutes before Wolfe pushed his plate slightly forward and looked at me. There was never a crime in the legal sense, he said. No arrest, no charges. Yet every party involved was tried by themselves. I leaned back. So what was the case, really? He folded his napkin. A question of value. What we assign meaning to. A signature, a cookbook, a name, and how quickly those meanings crumble when examined. That sounds like a moral. No, he said, it's an observation. Morals require certainty. I cleared the dishes, and Wolfe returned to his orchids. As I loaded the dishwasher, I thought about everyone who had touched this case. Claire bending under the weight of someone else's legend. Drexler chasing legacy like a brand. Rusk trying to pen a reputation with a poison-tipped nib. Braverman, who ensured lies because they paid better than truth. Elias, who revered ink because he thought it would make memory permanent. And Wolfe, who never moved, never signed, never faked, but saw them all for what they were. Truth doesn't need a signature. It doesn't arrive with ceremony. It shows up quietly, usually after everyone has stopped speaking. That night, Wolfe called me into the office one last time. The note from Claire was still on the desk. Burn it, he said. I blinked. You? Sure? Yes, why? He looked up. Because it has served its purpose. Its meaning is no longer needed. I took the note, walked to the fireplace and dropped it into the flames. It curled, then vanished. Wolfe didn't watch. He closed his eyes as if nothing had happened. But I saw it. The faintest lift of tension from his shoulders. Not satisfaction. Closure. Later, as I turned out the lights and headed upstairs, I thought about how many people spend their lives trying to be remembered. Wolfe never did. He preferred to be understood, briefly, clearly, and only by those who earned the right.